My name's Mary Barnes, and I lived in the Derby Walker house for 11 years. My ex-husband and I moved in 1969. I was pregnant with my first son, and immediately we became involved with neighbors. It was a very neighborly place, but it became more so as time went on. Well, when we first lived there, we lived as tenants, and the landlord lived in San Jose. And there was already a movement afoot to try to keep absentee landlords out of the neighborhood and to keep the rents affordable. Really, people who spearheaded this were Doug and Gail Brown, who are our next door neighbors. And when we came to look at the place, I was visibly pregnant. My husband's African American, and Gail came running over to welcome us and to hope that we would be their next door neighbors. And immediately we started sharing things, childcare, met other people on the block who had children the same age or who didn't. There were single people, there were a number of family configurations that we all worked together there. And about a year after we had moved in, maybe a year and a half, the house was put up for sale by the absentee landlord in San Jose. And the idea was floated that perhaps we could get together and buy the place. Now, this was 1971. The cost was $40,000 for a 3-unit house at the corner of Derby and Walker Streets in Berkeley. But still, most of us were very low income, and none of us would have been able to buy the house on our own. And we wanted it to be a house that was bought and shared by the people in the community, keeping the rents low and affordable and keeping the absentee landlords out. So people in the neighborhood all chipped in between $200 and $500 for the down payment on that house that was bought for $40,000. So there were 14 people who contributed between $200 and $500. They were all people who lived in the neighborhood, except a couple of people's parents also chipped in. And that was true of Gail's parents, and it was true of Don Sherman's parents, who lived 2 doors down. But there was tremendous support for what we didn't call at the time cooperative housing, but that's certainly what we meant by it. Yeah, this is a cautionary tale because although everyone went into it with goodwill, there did have to be a title owner with good credit who would be the single party responsible. And we chose some people in the neighborhood who owned their own home, who were fully supportive of this idea, and who had excellent credit. There were evidently 2 titles drawn up. I have a copy of one of them in which there are the names of 14 different parties who had contributed to the down payment for this building. But the title with just one name on it, was the one that was filed with the county. And when we started to try to legally make this into a cooperative and did a title search, we found that that was the name that was filed with the county as the owner of the house, even though that owner had in fact signed over their part of the ownership to somebody else legally, and those documents had also been filed. It became very, very messy. And I said it's a cautionary tale because anyone else trying to form a cooperative needs to take all of the necessary legal steps, and no shortcuts, and have the patience, take the time to do the work.
And yet there was a lawyer involved.
There was a lawyer involved, and I mean, I think all of us have since kind of questioned what the role of that person was and whether there were other motives involved. But at any rate, that was the upshot of it.
So the lawyer never filed that deed.
The deed with the 14 names on it was never filed. Well, I live in the 9th Street Co-op and have been to some meetings of the Bay Area Community Land Trust and was very interested in their effort to convert properties to co-ops. And I thought, well, why not that property, which was, in fact, that was the idea of it from the beginning, was that it would be cooperatively owned and run, and people would do their own work, and the rents would be kept affordable. And so I suggested it to Rick Lewis and to Kathy Labriola, who are both very involved in the Bay Area Community Land Trust. And we explored it, and first we thought it wouldn't work, and then we ran into numerous obstacles. And there was dispute about the title, but and I'm not sure how much to say about that really, but that obstacle was removed, and somebody did get paid off. Well, it was the most wonderful neighborhood and the most wonderful community spirit that I've really ever experienced. I mean, I live in a cooperative now, and I've lived in another cooperative for 13 years, and there were not as many cooperative activities in the co-ops as there was in that neighborhood. And what do I mean by that? Well, we shared childcare. We exchanged tools. We had a volleyball team. We competed in the down at Live Oak Park with our Walker Street volleyball team. We actually published a newsletter. We printed it ourselves, and it was called The Daily Walker. The house is at the corner of Derby and Walker Street in Berkeley, and we had numerous activities. We used to have cooperative shopping. We had many potlucks. We used to have Sunday brunches that rotated around at different people's houses. Every 4th of July, which happened to be Gail Brown's birthday, we had a big block party. And when I say block party, we pulled out all the stops. I mean, we had races, we had dancing in the street, we had fireworks, we had huge potluck, we had singing. It was really a golden age. And a friend actually who visited, who is a published writer, Myra Goldberg, actually wrote a short story about it, and I would like to try to dig that up, and because she described it as somebody outside the community, and she was utterly charmed by it. It was a great place for children to grow up. And our children walked together to school. Even in kindergarten, they walked to LeConte School together. We would take turns picking up the kids from school, taking them to kinder gym at the Y, or swimming. It was really a great place to raise children and a great time. It was very affordable. I remember when our rent went up to $200 a month. And we had a very small, the bedrooms were very small and opened out onto a main room. But we had a 2-bedroom place. There was a 1-bedroom place in the back, and then there was a 3-bedroom place upstairs, or barely 3 bedrooms. One of the closets, I think, had been made into the 3rd bedroom. But affordability, the people who lived there didn't have very many other options. We certainly didn't. And when we left there, we went into Section 8 housing, actually, in another cooperative. But it was clear that rents were going up astronomically in Berkeley. And for people who didn't have other options for various reasons. My husband had been unemployed for a couple of years during that time. People were dealing with various issues that they really didn't have money to live anywhere else. And in order to keep those rents low, we had to do some things cooperatively. Like I remember people getting out there on the roof and putting in the new roof when it leaked. And my ex-husband was up there, and Lori's ex-husband was up there, and we did things. And I have to say, in all honesty, we also deferred things because we couldn't afford it. And that is one of the problems I think the co-op is facing right now, that there's deferred maintenance that they have, I think, taken out a loan in order to do some of that. Well, I'm just so delighted that it is going to be under the management of Bay Area Community Land Trust. It will remain a cooperative. It will be affordable. And I mean, the son of one of the people who lived there is still there. My daughter lived there for a time, although she doesn't now. And numerous people in the neighborhood who really needed it lived in that building. And I'm just so very happy to see that that's what's happening with it. And, you know, I mean, Kathy has tried to give me a lot of credit for this, and it's not true. I mean, I did suggest it. I suggested it to people in the land trust that perhaps that property could be legally converted to a co-op. But there were so many hands and so many people involved in that. And I just want to put in, Doug Brown lived next door, and a lot of people know him in this community, and his wife Gail, and they were prime movers of everything that went on, and I think a great inspiration to many of us. And the many things that we did cooperatively, and we used to meet to kind of clarify our thought on various things, and pretty much everybody in the neighborhood was on the left and politically active and concerned, both at a local level and beyond. So that was also a good atmosphere to be raising your children in and to be able to be part of. It definitely does. I mean, to try to get your property out of the housing market, out of the profit-driven greed that is driving housing costs in this area. I do remember my ex-husband and I looking at buying houses in Berkeley and North Oakland, and the same houses, not the same type of house, but exactly the same houses that were selling for $18,000, $14,000, $19,000. Those houses are $500,000 and up now. And, there is no, I mean, I think it's the biggest myth going that there's some kind of intrinsic value in housing, that it's worth this much because this is what the market will bear. It's just not true. And I think when people realize that, and they're willing to live more simply so that other people can simply live, when they're willing to band together and keep the housing affordable and not wanting to profit by having it go up exponentially in value and then profiting off that value off somebody else's back, that's what I think we were drawn together to do, and that's what cooperative housing stands for, as I see it. I think the whole system is absurd, and I'm also a union person. I've just retired this past April for 35 years in the nurses union, which has become a really progressive union. but there are constant cutbacks at every level in nursing. Do more with less. It's also so profit driven, and people who are day laborers, people who are unloading trucks, people who are doing seasonal labor, people who are working in hotels, how are they supposed to afford housing? Not to mention the fact that even union employees who once had very good jobs are up against it in terms of affording houses. I don't know much about economics. I love listening to Richard Wolff, but I can't believe that the whole house of cards isn't going to collapse at some point. But what will stand are the kind of housing and communities that cooperatives build. I see cooperatives as really the hope for the future in housing, but it takes a lot of work. And I see people who really give their whole lives to this. I mean, people like Rick Lewis, that's his life. That's not his activity or his job, it's his life. And I think for housing, cooperative housing to become established, we're going to have some people who are willing to push it beyond their own particular living situation so that other co-ops can form. It's a lot of work, and it's a rewarding work. Yeah, living in a cooperative and knowing the difficulties that can arise, it's very important that the housing has bylaws and has house rules, and that there's a way to enforce them, because property can quickly become degraded, and the idea can become degraded if people are not seeing themselves as part of this cooperative where their labor and their input and their participation is vital to it. A big difficulty that I see is people come into cooperatives and they think of it as rental property, that somebody else is going to do what they don't do, and it's not going to happen because we're the owners. These are our homes, it's our land, it's our buildings, and we have to take care of it, and we have to make provisions, whether those provisions are maintenance accounts, whether they're earthquake supplies, whether they're our own labor that we devote in yard work, in bookkeeping, and building a sense. I mean, one of the things that happened on Walker Street were things like the newsletter and the potlucks and the celebrations and the political work that was shared. And if that doesn't happen, you don't build a sense of community and a sense of commitment to being part of this enterprise that sustains your life. Yeah. Well, I don't want to pretend that it's easy, because it isn't, and we have conflicts that arise, and they're difficult to handle. And I do think that it is important to, and I know there are people who see this as less important than I do, but there have to be some things that are not, strictly speaking, about co-op business that people share. And inspired by Doug Brown, who recently died, I'm going to propose for our co-op that we also have a newsletter. And I'm going to volunteer to start that, because I think we need to do things. We need to have a day at the beach. We need to have things that we do with each other that build a sense of community.
Common history, common experiences.
Yeah, we have to have common history and common experiences, and we also have to face the fact that we have rules, and we have, in our co-op, we make decisions by consensus, and that means we all have to come to an agreement about something, and that can be very difficult, very difficult. On the other hand, if people are willing to compromise and not always be right, it can be done. Yes, and I don't know if I finished saying this before, but I think one of the big pitfalls is people who think, oh, cheap rent, and this is where I hang my hat, and this is where I sleep, and then I go off and don't participate in this cooperative. That doesn't work. That really undermines the whole idea of cooperatives. So there have to be clear expectations and clear guidelines and rules to make a cooperative work. Yeah, well, just that it doesn't mean that if you want cheap rent, you're a good candidate for a cooperative. It definitely doesn't. And people may, in fact, undermine that idea, the idea of cooperative living, by taking the cheap rent and not participating. That's what you got to avoid. And when people are coming into a cooperative, you have to make it really clear what the expectations are. And we still struggle with this in our co, but there have to be consequences. And what if somebody's not doing her or his share of the labor? What if we don't have a problem in our co-op of people not coming to meetings. We only have 5 units, but I know people in other co-ops where there are 20-some units or 50-some units, and people coming to the meetings and taking an interest and being willing to volunteer is a problem. Well, just that seeing the Derby Walker House going from being a rental properties and surrounded by a lot of conflict, moving to becoming a cooperative, it's just extremely gratifying. And, the kind of cooperation and community I experienced there were a real gift to my life.